Please, Susan Tyler. Okay, thank you. Actually, we have 4 without you, Joe Samalas, so thank you. Also present are Joe Samalas, Dave Lee, Joe Comerford, and Jonathan Shapiro, as well as Christina Dennison. Welcome, everyone. Under the MOA discussion, we wanted to fill you all in on our meeting last Monday with Dennis Solinsky. Also attending for DOT was Maureen Lawrence, who has recently been promoted to a position within that bureau that will enable her to really advocate for us and hopefully follow up and get things done. We basically told Dennis that we were able to move ahead with the letter separately from the $2.5 million. We reiterated the need for the commissioner to actually sign this letter. We asked for immediate approval of the TODs for the 3 staff positions and for the funds to be programmed for land acquisition for the shoreline facility. And he tasked Maureen Lawrence with getting on those issues right away. Laura indicated to him that while Middletown had begun the process of familiarizing and getting support for this project and the town council, that the towns of Durham and Middlefield will not be able to conduct a town meeting until a letter is in hand and executed. Laura or Joe, was there anything else? I was going to go into executive session and talk a little bit more about the $2.5 million. Before we do that, was there anything else regarding our meeting with Dennis that you want to bring up?
No.
Okay. So then let's go into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations at 1:05. May I have a motion to back to recording? Under old business, there is one item not listed here that I'll just briefly bring up, which is that at the estuary board meeting, we went back to our board members about approval for this committee to sign off on studies that were $150,000 or less. You may recall we worked on that a couple of times at this committee. We passed a recommended motion for the estuary committee. We have 5 members who support it, 1 member who is ambivalent, and 3 who oppose it. And in an effort to try to keep the actions for this expansion as unanimous as possible, we agreed to send out a listing of these studies and answer any questions the 3 who are reluctant to do this might have, and hope that at the October board meeting, we will be able to get the vote that we're looking for. These folks who are opposed to it went out of their way, I think, to say that it's not because they didn't trust this committee, more that they felt that this was a liability issue on the part of members approving contracts of that amount. We are, of the 12 or 16 studies, we're only talking about 4 that fall between the 50,000 and the 150,000 mark. Joe Comerford pointed out that the board has more than adequate D&O insurance to cover the liabilities, and I'm hopeful that once people have a little more time to think about it, we'll end up where we'd like to be. So that's just a FYI. Given John's attendance here, I'd like to move to the board policies first before we consider anything in the workload area. John, as you know, we asked to review our board policies as they were nearing finalization, and he did so. And as you might expect came up with a couple of things that we need to think about. We did send out a copy of John's email on that, and there are essentially 4 issues. The first issue, and I'm not going over the minor stuff, but the first issue was that the board policies do permit remote attendance at these board meetings. And John points out that that is commonplace now because of COVID, but when COVID no longer pertains, it is not uncommon for boards to restrict the number of remote meetings that a board member or director could attend. And the question is, do we want to restrict how many meetings a director can satisfy by a remote attendance? The way it is now, it's unlimited. Comments?
Well,
Joan?
yeah, being in the situation that I'm in, and one of the comments in one of the words used in the sentence was, you have to attend meetings physically to show your dedication. Well, I personally feel that you could show your dedication even by attending remotely through a phone call, as we had in the past prior to COVID taking place. So I don't think a restriction is needed.
Okay.
I agree with Joan.
Yep, so do I.
Okay. Ed?
And Susan, I made the point in my response to you. These policies can be amended by the new expanded board anytime. So in the foreseeable future, we'll be living with the COVID, but a year or 2 from now, if you have a board member that's chronically not attending in person and you want to change the policy, change the policy.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm in agreement.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that? So we'll keep that section of the policy the way it is. The second issue is a little more complicated, which relates to the actual role of the executive committee. Jonathan points out correctly that the bylaws state that no committee acts on or for the board. The policies suggest that the executive committee, if there is one, would be enabled to act on or for the board, or at least leaves that open to interpretation. Those comments suggest to me that we each may have inferred something about an executive committee that we might not have discussed. For example, my experience on executive committees is that they are always enabled and authorized to act on behalf of the board. Otherwise, there isn't much point in having an executive committee. Then it just becomes another committee that makes another recommendation to the board. But there is a way to interpret that to provide for an executive committee that does not have decision-making authority. Jonathan further suggested that if the executive committee is to have decision-making authority, that it be which types of decisions might best be outlined in both the bylaws and the board policies. John, do you have anything else to add to my summary of what you said?
Yeah, and just to be clear on kind of,
Thank you. Just take your pick. Here, take that. It's not quite enough, but take it. Okay.
I don't want it. I'll take the
finding
pickle
out in
later.
terms of what power the executive committee does have. Again, you know, obviously you're not going to be able to list every single thing, but again, I kind of try to give an example of, you know, whether it's a dollar value or things of that nature of what they can and can't do in between meetings, because you can't think of everything. So you try to set benchmarks what the executive committee can and cannot do, but it's typically all acts except A, B, C, and D.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, when we put this in place, was it everyone's assumption that this committee would or would not have decision-making authority for the board.
Let me ask a question. You do have an executive committee now of the estuary board, do you not?
No,
Oh, you do
Oh.
not? Oh, okay.
we do not.
Well, the way it was written, and maybe you don't need an executive committee at all, but the way it was written was with the intention that there would be a small subset of the leadership of the board that would determine when a special meeting was called for and would set the agendas both for regular and special meetings. And in addressing whatever issues come up that become agenda items, could make assignments to staff and say, we're going to put this on the next board meeting agenda. Here are some things that you need to do before that to help us prepare. It could, I suspect you're going to have monthly board meetings, and you can call a special meeting on short notice anytime. So it's a fair question whether the mechanics of running the new expanded transit district require a small subset of the full board to be empowered to make actual commitments and decisions on behalf of the full board in between those meetings or without calling a special meeting.
Mhm.
That's really the key question is beyond setting the agenda and giving staff assignments and deciding what's important that needs to be addressed at the next or special meeting. Do you want an executive committee to be empowered to do something in lieu of taking it to the full board? And if you do, then Jonathan is absolutely right. You've got to be very specific about what it is they're empowered to do or not empowered to do.
I think part of the issue, and as Dave points out, is that we really don't know how this larger board is going to operate. I think it's safe to assume that during the transition period, the board will meet monthly. If the board is meeting monthly, do we really need an executive committee? However, at such point as the board has embraced the new members and we move to a 12-member district, and then subsequently maybe even to an 18-member district, we may in fact have only quarterly meetings, which is what's required by statute, and have the executive committee manage the affairs in the off meeting months. I don't think we really know exactly how this is going to work. And we can either keep it in the bylaw, put it in the bylaws and keep it in the board policies as a committee that can be established, or as Dave suggested, not include it right now, but add something, a provision for it later on by simply amending the board policies. So let's hear what everybody thinks makes the most sense.
Well, having read through Jonathan's comments and thinking about them, I'm wondering at this stage of the game of the beginning of our new consolidated district, if we really do need an executive committee established at this very point in time, because it may happen that as we conduct our business, we could do it as we have been presently through our regular meetings and special meetings as needed. But, and then see what happens when we expand even to a larger board. So I currently right now am favoring the fact of not including the executive committee currently, but being open to have the possibility that we might need it in the future once we have a much larger board.
So not have it included right now, Joan, in the policies?
Yes.
Okay. Angus, where are you?
Yeah, that's pretty close to where I am. I don't see an immediate need, and we can add it if it is necessary.
Okay, Laura?
I'm good.
Okay, Ed?
Ed, you're muted.
Ed? Okay, since we do have both chairpersons on the call now, let me ask Leslie and Joe.
I'm sorry, I apologize about that. I got.
Okay, no problem. Are you,
I'm using a newer laptop here and not quite familiar, but I am on board with that
Okay.
plan.
Okay.
Absolutely.
okay, thanks. Joe Samalas and Leslie, do you have a opinion about this?
Well, Nine Town has not ever, it never occurred to me we need an executive committee. I think absence of language is just fine. And should the new board discover they do need something, they can always add it in.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm in concurrence as well. I mean, I think technology has played a pivotal role in the last year and a half, and we could easily call a special meeting and get people to participate. So I'm fine
Okay.
with leaving it out for the time.
Great. All righty. So Dave, if we could ask you to make that change. As I recall, it doesn't require any change to the bylaws because we're not in conflict anymore. Okay. Jonathan's third point, with regard to the remaining committees, you thought there could be greater clarity as to what each committee has the authority to do and not do. I think the way we had left it was that a committee can only make a recommendation to the full board. Isn't that, Dave, what's basically in there?
Yeah, Jonathan pointed out correctly that for the board, the finance committee, they have one specific, among their other sort of duties that come up as needed. One thing they must do is annually review the budget and recommend approval of the budget to the full board. You could use similar language for the other committees, although it's not really necessary because it says that the committees will review and discuss and have the staff present to them things that then become recommendations to the full board. But it was never envisioned that the committee would have authority beyond the responsibility to review certain things in certain subject areas and bring recommendations to the board.
Okay.
I can make that better language for them, but I'll work on that. But that's the way we'll leave it.
The other thing we've had problems with in the past is committees, let's say, expanding their charge. So I
Power
don't know.
grabbing.
Yes. So I don't know if we want to. Are we clear enough in there, kind of what the board expects the committee's purview to be? Because Leslie knows this well.
I'm aware of the situation that you're referring to. I think it would be very difficult to
I know, without being, I know you don't want to be too restrictive.
put language
but
in there.
Something that,
And
but that has been an issue.
I think we're just gonna have to count on the board chair to be able to keep this under control.
With Joe's guidance, we have been in that situation, and if somebody needs a hand slapped, it's been done. And it can be done again.
Okay. Jonathan, are you comfortable with where we are on that point?
Yep.
Okay. And the last series of points was some inherent inconsistency between the bylaws and the board policy with regard to the role of a treasurer. And John recommended some language for how to make those agree. And I think
And I've got that. I'll put it in.
Okay.
That he's absolutely right that in the investment policy, it said the treasurer will do certain things, and the point in the bylaws was the treasurer acts at the direction of the full board. So just add that language to the investment policy.
Okay, all right. I think that with these discussions that we're pretty much where we need to end up on both the bylaws and the board policies. Of course, these need to be approved by the ultimate expanded estuary board at some future point. What I would like to do, if it is acceptable to everyone on the committee, once Dave finishes these changes, is to send a copy of the bylaws as they currently stand and the board policies to all of the members of the estuary board, most of whom have not had any exposure to these. And I think that the longer amount of time we give them to look at them and ask questions and feel comfortable with what's in there and why we did what we did, I think the better off we'll be. So if there is no objection to our doing that on the estuary side, we will go ahead and do that once Dave completes these changes. Okay, let's see. The next item of agenda is the committee workload. I was able to put together some suggested proposals for how this is all going to work as we go forward. And I do apologize for not being able to get it out to everyone ahead of time. I don't anticipate acting on any of these things at this point, but rather have a discussion. What we tried to do in putting this together is to create a reasonable role for the committee that was not overwhelming and did not usurp other board members or the staff, but keep our finger on the pulse where we needed to as we went through this process. So in other words, all the committee involvement we need, but only the committee involvement that we need. And we tried to create some specific types of actions that we would do routinely. This proposal calls, for example, for the committee to act as the oversight committee on the transition and would review things that the districts are supposed to do, that the staff is supposed to do, that DOT is supposed to do, and monitor those. And that would require the development or the revision of a more comprehensive implementation plan. You might recall that we had a really nifty one of those in the original MOA that we did, and all of the appendices went by the wayside with this DOT letter replacing the MOA, and we did not include the implementation plan in the inter-district MOA because we really didn't have a good handle on the dates. So I guess I'll just open it up to discussion and see what you all feel about how this would work and any suggestions, concerns, things we should take into account to try to revise it as we move forward and not create such a huge workload that it's unmanageable, but provide the necessary oversight so that people are comfortable that enough eyes have been looking at something before we make decisions. Oh, and one other thing I'll say, under all these projects, the technical projects, which Joe has up on the screen now, those are all highly technical things, radios, software, run cutting, all that sort. That we don't envision this committee really participating real time in developing the scope or selecting the vendors, that kind of thing. We would, through Joe Comerford and staff, monitor the consultant work, keep up to date, and and let the boards know of anything that they need to know about. Under the special studies, which are contain more policy oriented and management oriented issues, such as human resources and making wages and salaries on a parity basis, labor issues, which includes obviously the unionization issue, PR and marketing, other legal issues that may come up, and additional policy related studies. We felt there was a larger role for this committee to play, not to prepare the scope, but to review it, to oversee the selection of vendors, and then to do the same thing that it would do in the technical studies, which is to monitor performance and alert the larger board as necessary and appropriate. So that's kind of where we came down on this. So I promise that's all I'm going to say about it at this point. So let's open it up to reactions, discussions, how you would like to proceed on this issue.
Well, I can't comment too deeply on it. I did look at it, but one thing that I am very grateful for is it actually does lay out a plan for this group. And I think that's a great first step in looking how we're going to spend the next year, what we're going to do. It looks very reasonable as far as I can tell with what this group is expected to do. It's a lot. But, you know,
That was my first comment.
Yeah.
Whoa.
yeah,
But at least it's a good outline.
yeah,
I like the fact that you put some target dates in there, but I think the board, the larger board should know that those can change. And that some of these things will be happening simultaneously. But thank you for doing this.
Well, as you point out, it's a plan, and
Yeah.
plans can be outdated as soon as you finish typing them up.
mhm,
So I think that if we keep ourselves and the boards up to date on where we are, there's nothing sacrosanct about those deadlines. They're suggested ones based on what we think is actually doable after talking with Joe. There is one more issue which he just reminded me to bring up, which is the service enhancement issue. You may remember that the transit study had a whole separate series of recommendations on service enhancements for the new district that are not really on the table right now because of lack of funding. And in preparation for looking at some of those, the estuary board created its own committee to look at service enhancements. And one of the questions there is, since service enhancements will affect the entire combined expanded districts, should the estuary committee be reconstituted to add some members from the Middletown district in its deliberation as we go forward, in the same way that this committee is a joint committee of both boards. The Service Enhancement Committee would be a joint committee of both boards. Joe Comerford, was there anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I think you summed it up well. I think, yeah, just one of the many things you need to start. What Susan and I were talking is we start thinking as one here on these service enhancements, because that's.
Yeah, it's
by the time
gonna,
this
it's
stuff
gonna
gets
come,
funded, we're gonna be one, so why have separate? Why be discussing it separately now, when it really is going to be something for the larger district too?
yeah, Joe has said exactly what I was gonna say. Why start a separate committee when we're eventually going to be one? we might as well just join together and start working together on this together.
And it starts to introduce the members across both for the needs on each of the two areas. You know, they'll start to learn, you know, what are Middletown's needs and what are the shoreline needs. And, you know,
Yeah,
just
and we
this
don't
group
really
did, just
know.
like this group did, you know, it's how this group has come to where I don't see this group as ever seeing Middletown only or estuary only. And that's, I kind of think where we want the service side to be too.
Mhm.
Yeah, the sooner that happens, I think the better. And it's this comes as no surprise, this whole spreadsheet here, all the items on it. I don't think it just should surprise anyone. And it's very comprehensive. And as Susan says, you know, we'll add and subtract from it as necessary going forward. I think as we work our way through this.
Okay, Joan, do you have any comments on the work plan?
Was that Joan or Joe?
Joan, I'm sorry, you.
No, I think it's great that you put everything together in one document that we'll keep track of, because I have paper notes all over the place. So this is very organized. We have a plan together, and I applaud you for doing this for us.
Okay, how is everyone on this service enhancement committee being reconfigured to represent both districts? Ed, I know is in favor of
Yes,
that.
I would do that, you know, ASAP. Why not?
Okay. Joan,
I think that that's necessary.
Laura,
Yep.
Angus?
Yeah, there's no question that it's necessary. And I think it's important for some of the reasons that have already been expressed, maybe. But I think it's worth saying again, it's necessary because estuary, we've been focused on the shoreline. It's been focused on Middletown, and there are some huge differences in the needs. And it's important for estuary to learn the needs of the inland and vice versa. So I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Joan, are you good on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. I want to ask Christina Dennison, who's on. Your ears were ringing because I threw your name in there a few times. Are you comfortable with where you appear in this workload plan?
Oh, yes, yep.
Good answer, Chris. Yeah, I thought that one of the things you could really, the roles you could really serve is to be our warden, so to speak, and make sure that at every one of these meetings, the committee is looking at what upcoming targets and dates are to find out what the status of those things are, so we don't miss deadlines and largely with regard to DOT. So I'm glad you're reasonably comfortable
Yeah,
about.
no, we've started, Joe and I have started, I've started working on the project software and adding, and I just am working on my project charter now for the human resources study. I'll move on to fair study. So yeah, we're working on it.
Okay. All righty. If you all could have a revised implementation plan for our next meeting, that would probably be very useful. And I see we're bumping up against 2 o'clock. So can we kind of agree that this will be our working plan, at least for the time being? We'll change it as we need to. And if you read through it and something really strikes you as off that you would like to change, obviously we can do that and we will. But let's agree to follow something like this for the next month or so.
On board.
Okay, thank you. Under new business, those of you from Estuary already know this, but I am resigning from the board of Nine Town Transit. effective at the end of October. My husband and I have made the decision to relocate to Southern California, where our children and grandchildren are. And we just can't wait to get to the land of no water and earthquakes and fire. But the town of Lyme is actively looking for a replacement for me. And Leslie and Joe Comerford are working on some workload issues as far as the estuary board and this committee is concerned. So I just wanted to fill everybody in on that. Our next meeting will be September 28th, next week at 1. By the way, I think that once this letter from DOT is executed, maybe even before, we can probably go back to a bi-weekly meeting as opposed to a weekly meeting. But for now, let's keep it at this pace, and hoping that we'll be able to wrap up the DOT letter anyway, and continue to work on the 2.5 million. So for next steps, Chris, we have Dave will revise the bylaws and policies, and we will distribute those to the estuary members for their information and review. We will continue to review the workload and make any changes you all feel is necessary. And we will count on a revised implementation plan for the expansion that we can kind of inaugurate when we meet next week. Is there any other new or old business? Okay, there being none, may I have a motion to adjourn at 2:03?
So moved, Joan.
Joan, thank you. Second. Second, Angus, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all
Aye.
for a good meeting. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We'll see you next Tuesday, the 28th.
Okay.
Thank you.